The phone vibrated beneath the table, a silent tremor against my palm. My son's engagement party was in full swing, a glittering spectacle of chandeliers, champagne, and forced smiles. An unknown number, one line, "Don't react, you are in danger." My heart hammered, but years on Wall Street had taught me to mask every emotion. I smiled, lifted my crystal glass, and took a slow sip of water, my gaze sweeping the room. Everything seemed perfect, yet a cold dread began to coil in my gut. Claudia Reeves, my son Preston's fiancée, was watching me. Her eyes, every few minutes, found mine, not with warmth, but with a calculating intensity that felt like a transaction being monitored. Then the phone buzzed again, and the next message made my blood run cold. The ballroom of the Pierre Hotel was a masterpiece of opulence. 40 feet above, a sea of ivory-clad tables gleamed with gold-rimmed china and crystal. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Central Park stretched out, a dark quilt stitched with the amber glow of city lights. But all I could see were the gardenias, white, heavy, arranged in towering crystal vases. Their scent filled the air. My late wife, Margaret, had loved gardenias. She grew them along the south fence of our Greenwich home, a constant reminder that beautiful things required patience. Standing there, surrounded by flowers I hadn't ordered, hadn't chosen, the familiar ache of grief settled in. Preston was already at our table, looking impossibly young in his charcoal suit. He gripped my hand, tighter than necessary. "Dad, I'm glad you're here." My reply, meant to be warm, landed somewhere closer to obligation. Then Claudia stepped forward. 32, dark-haired, impeccably dressed in midnight blue. "Conrad," she said, extending her hand. "Thank you for coming. Not Mr. Whitfield, but Conrad, as if we were already family. A closeness I hadn't consented to." Her grip was firm, brief, and entirely deliberate. Her smile, perfect and unmoving, didn't quite reach her eyes. I worked the room, a habit ingrained from 35 years of boardrooms. Methodical, observant, giving just enough attention to be seen, never enough to be owed. It was during my second circuit, between a polite exchange with a couple I barely recognized, that my phone vibrated again. I drew it out, discreetly. Unknown number. "Don't react. You are in danger. Look at the man carrying the black leather briefcase near the east wall." My chest tightened, but I didn't look up immediately. I brought my water glass to my lips, took a slow sip, and let my gaze drift casually toward the east wall. He was there, a man of about 45, heavy set, his expensive suit failing to conceal it. A black leather briefcase, reinforced corners, a combination lock, pressed flat against his right thigh. He was speaking to no one. He was watching Preston. My throat went dry, but my face remained a mask. I slipped the phone back into my pocket, returning to my table with a laugh I didn't feel. I sat, unfolded my napkin, and studied the chilled soup I couldn't taste. I waited. 11 minutes later, the phone vibrated again. I read the message under the table, tilted away from Preston, from Claudia, from everyone. The man with the briefcase introduced himself to the family as your personal attorney. His name is Fletcher Dunn. He is not licensed to practice law in New York. He is not licensed anywhere. Check the New York State Bar Association directory. He does not exist. My hand tightened around the phone, my pulse thrumming in my fingertips. I looked up. Claudia Reeves was watching me, an expression I could only describe as anticipation, dressed in politeness. She lifted her wine glass, a barely perceptible tilt. I returned the gesture, smiled, and inside my chest, something dormant for years, a cold, precise, utterly patient part of the man I used to be, quietly woke up. The soup was replaced by a salad I didn't touch. Preston moved with a restless energy, needing to be liked by everyone. Claudia stood wherever she chose, letting people come to her. I watched them, a silent observer in a room full of carefully constructed illusions. Later, in the quiet of a consultation room, I told Preston everything. The internal audit of 2009, the discrepancies, the 3 months of quiet investigation. The morning I laid the documentation before Bernard Reeves, Claudia's father, and watched the color drain from his face. The choice I offered him, the choice he made. and the SEC referral I made anyway. Bernard had stolen from clients who trusted him. The decision to refer him to the SEC had been correct. But correctness, I understood now, does not neutralize consequence. The right decision had produced a devastated family, and that devastated family had produced Claudia Bernard Reeves, brilliant, patient, and absolutely merciless. Preston listened, his hands wrapped around a cold coffee cup, turning it slowly between his palms. When I finished, he set the cup down with a care that was almost tender. "She told me," he said, his voice entirely level, "that she loved me. She told me I was the first person who had ever really understood her. She said her father's death had left her alone in the world, and that finding me had been—" He stopped, his jaw tightening. "She said finding me had been like coming home." His eyes were dry and very bright, the brightness of eyes that have used up their tears and arrived somewhere beyond them. Agent Moore, seated in the corner, spoke. "Mr. Whitfield, what you've just described, the deliberate cultivation of a romantic relationship for the purpose of financial fraud, constitutes a specific category of federal offense. It does not diminish what you experienced. It categorizes it, and it carries significant sentencing weight." Preston looked at her, and something moved across his face I couldn't entirely name. Not gratitude, not relief, but the recognition that what had been done to him had a name, a legal weight, and that the law considered it serious. "Thank you," he said. Moore turned to me. "Mr. Whitfield, you mentioned an audio recording from this evening. I'd like to hear it." I reached under the bed, unclipped the device from the interior lining of my jacket, a narrow, matte black cylinder, no larger than a thick pen. 3 months ago, a colleague in private security had advised me that if my suspicions about Claudia Reeves were correct, contemporaneous audio documentation would be the difference between allegation and evidence. I had this device installed by a licensed private security firm. It was voice-activated, encrypted, and transmitted to a secure server registered in my name. The recording began. Claudia's voice, calm and precise, detailing her plan. The years of careful cultivation, the manipulation of Preston's vulnerabilities, the intricate web of shell companies and offshore accounts. Marsh's voice, equally calm, confirming the financial mechanics. Preston's voice, shaking, pleading, as he realized the depth of the betrayal. It was all there, undeniable. Marsh was arrested, facing multiple counts of wire fraud and federal conspiracy. His lawyers would fight it, but the recorded call, Preston's shaking voice, Marsh's calm one, was evidence. And evidence, in my experience, tends to outlast the arguments made against it. Of the $8.7 million Preston had paid to Marsh, $5.1 had been recovered through civil forfeiture proceedings. The remaining $3.6 was still being traced. Preston had signed the cooperation agreement, and 2 weeks after the engagement party, he walked into a gambling addiction treatment center. He went every Thursday, without fail. He called me on Sundays, every Sunday, something that hadn't happened in 10 years, and which I now found to be the finest part of my week. Owen Tate, the man who sent me the initial warning texts, had accepted a position at Whitfield Advisory Group, the consultancy I'd established in Greenwich. Derek Stone, the private investigator, declined a formal role but accepted a consulting arrangement and a standing invitation to dinner. I set my coffee cup on the windowsill and looked at the gardenias. Beautiful things require patience, Margaret had said every summer, her hands in the dark soil. I had heard it, agreed, and moved on. I was done moving on. The phone on the counter showed a message from Preston. "Stamford appointment went well. Staying for dinner if that works. Bringing Owen." I typed back, "It works. I'll tell Mrs. Alcott." I went out to the garden. The April air was cool, carrying the particular sweetness of things returning. The gardenias, the wet earth, the maple trees along the drive beginning to leaf. I stood at the south fence, looking at what Margaret had planted and tended and loved for 30 years, what I had paid someone else to tend for years since, and what I intended this spring to tend myself. It would take time, most things worth having done. I was not in a hurry. Looking back, I understood something I hadn't understood that night at the Pierre. This was never just about money. Every family betrayal begins the same way, not with a villain, but with a wound someone decided to turn into a weapon. Claudia was not born wanting to destroy. She was born loving her father. The destruction came after. I am not a man who prays often, but I have asked God more than once whether doing the right thing and causing irreparable damage can occupy the same moment. I have not received a clean answer, so let me say this directly. One person to another, do not be like me. Do not let distance grow between you and the people you love until it becomes permanent. Do not assume presence is the same as connection. Every family story contains a version of this, a silence that lasted too long, a decision that rippled further than anyone intended. Every family betrayal carries a smaller, earlier failure inside it, a moment when someone chose distance over honesty. It matters. It always matters. This is a family story worth remembering, not for the fraud, not for the arrests, but for what it cost two people to finally sit across a kitchen table and tell the truth.